Hey, thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus. I'm 9 News meteorologist Chris Bianchi. All right, here's the question that it seems like that a lot of you have been asking me and all our meteorologists here at 9 News for the last few weeks. Does all this wet weather that we've had throughout the course of the spring and into the early part of the summer, does that mean we're going to have a wet summer and perhaps even beyond that into the fall? The quick answer, not necessarily. I'll explain all this here in just a second. But first of all, let's take a look back at what we've seen so far this spring here in Denver and along the Front Range. These totals are truly close to astronomical for us here in Denver. This is our wettest start officially to a calendar year in Denver since 1983. So it has been a long time since we've seen this much water in this short of a time span. And for us here along the Front Range, we are close to about double what we typically get since January the 1st. For what it's worth, when we're talking about precipitation, for those of you who might not know, that is rain and melted snow equivalent. So you take the snow and the hail, the sleet that we get, and you melt it down to the rainfall equivalent. That total number is what you're seeing on the left-hand side of your screen, 11.66 inches, and that is close to 6 inches above our year-to-date average. And it's not just Denver here, folks. Denver, not just some one city outlier. The entire Front Range swimming in the amount of precipitation we've had since January the 1st. Look at Colorado Springs, 15.35 inches worth of rain, melted snow equivalent since the start of the year. Folks, for Colorado Springs, second wettest start to a calendar year on record there. Denver, the 11th wettest. Fort Collins, 14th wettest start to a calendar year. Boulder tied for the 15th wettest start to a calendar year on record. All right, so at this point, you get the idea. We've had a lot of water so far this spring, but does that mean we are going to have a wet summer as well? So here's the overall summer weather outlook. For one, it is pretty clearly trending warmer than average, and I'll explain why in just a second. It is certainly, at this point, appears to be leaning drier than average, and in particular, in the western and southern parts of the state. And as always, when we're talking about these 3-month outlooks, these overall outlooks, take them with a grain of salt, because predicting these sorts of trends, especially for us here in Colorado, for a number of different reasons, it is especially difficult. And full transparency here, folks, I'm going to be honest about it, we often get these sorts of outlooks wrong. So climate 3-month outlooks and these sorts of forecasts are very much a young thing. These are in their infancy. We've been doing this for maybe 10, 20 years, and there's only kind of general trends we can lean off of. So take it with a grain of salt. And I'm just being honest about that because, again, sometimes we often get these sort of, I don't know, it's just something to take with a small little grain of salt for a number of different reasons. All right, but with that said, don't want to diminish it too much here. Here's the overall precipitation outlook. And right now, it appears that southern and western Colorado would be leaning in the drier than average side of things, while maybe the far northeastern sliver of Colorado above average. And also, in terms of temperatures, pretty much the entire state at this point appears to be leaning above average in terms of the overall summer temperature outlook. And the reason why, it all relates to one thing. When we get to this time of year, the way we get our rain and we get any sort of precipitation, it varies and it changes to something called the monsoon. You've probably heard about the monsoon a million times, but how exactly does it work? Well, for one thing, you get an area high pressure that's anchored over the southeast United States that typically draws up a lot of kind of hot and humid air out of the Gulf of Mexico. It pumps it up into places like Chicago and the Midwest, and that's why it's so humid in that part of the state. Now, that part of the country. Now, that said, that same area high pressure tends to also bring us some moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico thanks to winds going around an area high pressure in a clockwise direction. Long story short, all you need to know is for us here in Colorado, area high pressure over the southeast, that means more moisture out of the Gulf, and an area high pressure also develops over northern parts of Mexico typically, and that often draws up moisture out of the Pacific as well. So what it tends to mean is more storms, more afternoon storms come mid to late July, and especially in August and early September. That's kind of the heart of monsoon season. Late July, August, and September. That is the heart of the so-called monsoon season when we get a lot of this Gulf of Mexico and Pacific moisture, and that tends to move its way into our region. Now, for us here in Colorado, at this point, that lack of monsoon, because what we're looking at here, and here's once again that overall summer weather outlook, when we get an El Nino, we tend to have a later onset of the monsoon. So the monsoon tends to get delayed by about a month or two. And some of the shorter term computer forecast models are also indicating that. So that's why at this point, it is trending warmer and drier than average for us here across the Southwest. And the further south and west you go in Colorado, that trend tends to be a bit greater. Now, of course, we start off the summer season with a nearly perfect drought map here across the state of Colorado. And that's thanks to all the spring moisture that we've had. But of course, those sorts of things can change with the flip of a switch here, folks. And when we're getting to this time of year, we're transitioning from the summer, I should say the spring areas of low pressure, kind of more cooler weather events, cooler rain and cooler snow events. We transition from that over to the summer monsoon. And the way to think of it is two very different mechanisms for producing precipitation, for producing moisture. And as a result of that, because of that, there's no real relation to summer and early fall rain and thunderstorm activity compared to what we typically get from the spring months, if that makes sense. It's apples and oranges. It's a very different way to get moisture. And at this point, it appears that we are trending on the drier side for us here into the upcoming summer season. So worth noting, I'm going to leave you with this, those top line takeaways. It is trending warmer than average, leaning drier than average, and take this all with a grain of salt, because predicting sorts of climate outlooks on a month by month and a season by season basis, and I mentioned this before, that sort of forecasting is very much in its infancy. So just being transparent about it, this is a new science, and as a result of that, starting to get an idea for general trends, but those general trends may not necessarily translate sometimes, and sometimes these forecasts can be wrong. That said, overall lean would be a warmer and drier summer and early fall, thanks to some of those reasons that I just mentioned. So hopefully it gives you a good idea about what to expect. But I think another key takeaway, and I'll leave you with this, I've been mentioning a lot of the asterisks with this forecast. One thing that is definitive, one thing I can definitely tell you, is that the fact that we've had a really, really wet spring, that this basically has no impact on the summer and fall season, because the different ways we get our moisture, if that makes sense. So again, the definitive would be that the rain that we've had so far this spring, very little impact on what we get through the summer and the early fall, but the overall fall, and I should say summer and early fall outlook, would lean drier and warmer. So hopefully that answers some of your questions, and thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus.